So in the last class, we were talking about how to do the configurations, right? We have created one of the config file .ttsconfig for this package, and we said, let's say if you have the connection properties that you want to change from outside the connection, when you move from test to dev to test or test to prod, and you want to make the connection without going into the package, without opening the Visual Studio. So what you do is you make those as a property and try to change those properties from the config file, which you can directly open in the notepad and change the connections and the databases if the names are different, or any other properties like that you want to control from outside, or if you have like a flat file connections that you want to do, anything that you want to be controlled from outside the package from an XML file that user has to change while doing the testing, you can send it to the config file. So now each package is associated with the two files. One is the package file and one is the config file, right? And we have talked about the approach would not be good if you have like tons of packages, or like if you have 20-30 packages, you don't want to create for each of them. So let's try to talk about other technique that can be used for the configurations. Okay, so let's say what I do is I right click in here and I say go to the package configuration, right? So this one is the configuration file we created. What would be the other configurations that you can have? So let's say you don't need to have each type of configuration. Either you're gonna, when you have, let's say, small packages, you're gonna work on the XML configuration file, like 2 or 3 packages. That's fine to have the XML configuration. You don't want to go with the pain of framework that supports multiple packages, because it comes with a lot of coding then. I mean, like lot of other things. So XML configuration is good for the smaller one. So now think about if you have to do other kind of configuration, okay, within the package. You're not doing the XML configuration. What are the other ones? So I click add, and this shows me the option that I have for the configuration. So you have XML configuration, and then you have the SQL Server configuration. Okay, so basically the SQL Server configuration, what you're gonna do is the environment variable and the registry is basically what you do is the variable that you create in here, you can have that value passed from the registry or Windows registry or the environment variable. So these two are not like a total solution for your configuration. Okay, it needs to be complement with either SQL Server configuration, or it needs to be complement with XML configuration. Okay, we're gonna talk these two about later, but let's first see the SQL Server configuration. How do you do the SQL Server? So for doing the SQL Server configuration, what you're saying is basically I'm gonna store my configuration, instead of this time in a file, I'm gonna save it in some database. Okay, so when you do that, pick that option, it's gonna say specify the configuration settings directly. So it's saying where is the configuration table for the destination, okay, or any of these connection, whether you have the configuration table, where is the that exists. Okay, is it in the same database as the destination, or it is the same database in the source, or it's in some other database. Okay, so wherever you have the config file from where you're going to read the value, you should pick that connection in here. Do we have a table in here? We don't, because we haven't had any configuration yet. So let's try to create a new connection, and we're going to create a new configuration table. Okay, so I say I'm going to keep my configuration table out of these two databases. Okay, I'm going to keep it in, either I can keep in the SQL Training 2017. Okay, I'm going to keep my configuration table in my destination one. I click OK, and I say, or this could be as same as this one. I don't want to create a separate no, you know what, okay, I create a separate connection for this one, right? So what I'm going to do is, why I'm creating a separate connection for this one, I don't want to use the existing one. I'm creating a separate connection so that whenever you move the package, you just have to say, when you are in the test, where is your table, in which SQL Server and in which database it is, right? So you just need to configure this connection basically. Okay, so because when you're running the package and when you go from dev to test, and if you have a different server names and different databases name, this connection will not be valid anymore. So you have to have this connection to be configured from outside, right? So what we're going to do is, that's why we're going to make this as a separate connection so that it can be configured when you move from dev to test, you say, okay, this is my connection which is going to be changed either from an environment variable or from a registry or from a XML configuration file. Okay, this connection which points to the configuration table, and everything else in my packages that are variable that needs to be changed on the runtime will be coming from the configuration table. Okay, all right. So I pick the database, I make a new connection, and I don't have any table right now, so I say I want to create a new table. So I click on new, and it creates a table called SSIS configuration for you, which has configuration filter, configured value, package path, and configured value type 4 columns. You don't need to worry about the table, it automatically creates for you what the value what are the value need when it runs the configuration. Okay, so it creates the table for you. It just needs to be done one time. Okay, you don't need to do it every time. Once you have the table in the database, you're gonna pick the database and you're gonna point always to this SSIS configurations table. Okay, all right. So now it's saying in the next one, it is what is the configuration filter that you want to create. So let's say I'm saying my configuration filter would be for this package is I think in here you can say for my for each loop. Okay, that's my for each loop. Okay, so basically you're giving a name of the filter which will be saved in your table, so you know for each loop will points to this package. Okay, because each package can have different configuration filters. Okay, or even you can use the for each loop configuration for each loop filter. We're gonna see, so just hold on. So I'm giving a filter a name and we'll see what does it mean. Okay, so I click next in here in for each loop filter, and I'm gonna say, okay, for this package in the table I want the properties which are for my destination and source, I know which will be changing. So I say the properties that I want to include this time is the server name. Okay, my database name is same across all the environments in the dev, test, and prod. Okay, so I take the source server name and I take the destination server name. Those are the two properties that I want to configure from the table. I say server name. Okay, now if you have any other variables that you want to configure or any other properties, click on those ones. If you have any variable that you want to configure, click on that one. Okay, just go to the properties and pick the values that you want to configure. So let's say this value I want to configure from outside the package, so you pick the value, but just hold on to these two right now for the connection, destination connection and the source connection. Basically this is for where you getting the data from, where you moving the data to. Okay, so source to destination. Alright, these are the only two properties I want to configure from outside the package. So I selected my property, I click next, and it's saying what's the configuration name that we save in the package. So I say this is my configuration for source and destination. Okay, alright, source and destination. I click finish. So it says source and destination is my configuration done from the database. Okay, SQL Server configuration. All right, so I click close, and now let's take a look in the database. What does it look like, the table that we just created? And here I have the table called SSIS configuration. Okay, so it will save the property in here, and now you need to have the same table in the test, in the dev, and in the prod as well. Okay, so see in here it says this is my for each loop filter. Okay, which is the name of the filter, and then it says the configured value, the value for the server name is dot. Where this dot is coming from, this is the dot is basically your server name. Okay, how does it get the dot? Because in my configuration manager the source and the destination server names are dot. So if I open my configuration destination, see it's a dot. So if I put the server name dot, it means it's a local server. So if I have any server name, if I put that server name in here, That's okay. So what I was saying is, ah, okay, that's okay. So what I was saying is the dot is coming from in here. So if I had a server name, it instead of dot, it would be showing up the server name. Okay, so the configured value, and then the filter is called for each loop filter. So next time, let's say if you want to configure your filter for the server name, you know, for source or for destination, you can pick the for each loop, and then it automatically configure. We're gonna see. So, but is this clear? It's basically, how do you know which property you're setting in here? So this is the name, this is the value, and if you see the package path, it says in this package, this value will be set for which one? For the source connection server name, for the destination connection server name. Okay, this value will be set for these two: connection source, connection destination. So if you go in your package, basically this is your connection, right, where it is destination and source. Okay, so source and destination, and then it says in source and destination connection, I'm going to set the property server name. Okay, so if you change the server name in here, what your server name is, instead of dot, it will be run against that server. So let's say, now think about this: whenever you're running the package in dev, you just configure the value in here for the dev parameter. When you are in the test, you configure the same value for the test. What is your test server name, and what is your test source and destination, both of them. So every time you run the package in dev, it will automatically pick the value from the table, and you're gonna have the same table in your test. It will pick the value from there. Okay, so you don't need to worry about XML configuration files. Go and change every time when you move the packages around. The configuration files are pain. Let's say your package goes in the test, each of the configured values are changed in the XML file. When you, let's say they found some bug, they move it back to you, what you need to do, you need to change the configurations again for the dev, right? So that's the pain. So sometimes people will do is they will create the copies of the configuration file, and they don't move the configuration file. They just keep the 3 configuration file, one for dev, test, and prod, and they just keep moving the packages, you know. They don't need to do config files unless the config files get changed. But even maintaining 4 files then becomes pain, you know. So that's why when you have this, you don't need to worry about moving the XML configuration files or changing them, because it's all configured from the database. You configure it for the first time, that's it. Okay, so it's ease of doing it. So now what you can do is, once you have the source and destination created, what is still static. So if I go to package configuration, my configuration file server name and the database name will change when I go from dev to test, right? So I have to make this connection string. Yeah. Oh, you don't see anything? Sorry. Okay. Yep. I think I paused it. Sorry. So sorry about that. So I click on the package configuration, and you see the SQL Server configuration. The SQL Server configuration, this is my connection string for the SQL Server configuration. It means it's saying that this is my server name and this is the database name where my configuration table is. Okay, so to pointing the package to the configuration table, you have to have the XML configuration file or the environment variable, right? Because this connection string will change when you go from dev to test, and you cannot put this into the table, right? Because this one will change when you go from dev to test, and how you gonna point the package to that configuration server and the table, right? So once you create the SQL Server configuration, you have the problem. Now how you gonna point this configuration when you move from dev to test? So either you create an environment variable that is always in the machine and you don't need to worry about, or you create a XML configuration file. Okay, so either way I can do is, so let's see what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an environment variable for this. Okay, for this SQL Server property. So let's get rid of this one. Remove the configuration file. Okay, I think so. We can have it. Okay, so now did you understood why do I need a separate configuration for the SQL Server configuration table? So this is the table that points to your connections within the packages that you're going to use for your data flow task and everything. But the table itself needs a connection where it is in the database or which server it is when it's in the test, right? So what I can do is I can say first I need to go in my environment variables in the Windows, and then you can have the environment variables created in your Windows. So what this helps is each environment variable so basically this is where this will be set. This environment variable will be set on your server machine, not on your local desktop or anything. Wherever you have installed the SQL Server, it needs to be in that system, okay, the variables. So what's going to happen is when this package will be running, it reads the value from the variable that are on the server. Okay, so I have on the same machine, so I don't need to go on to my, because my server is the same machine. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to set the environment variable. So each dev environment, test environment, and the prod environment should have the variables created, and everyone will be pointing to the server name and the database name where configuration file exists. Does it make sense? Okay, so I'm going to create configurations in here. So I'm going to go to the environment variables in the system properties, and I'm going to say I want to create a new variable in here. Okay, new system variable. So you would be creating variables in the system, okay, because it's a system variable that you want to, not the user. So I create a new in here, and you're going to give the name. So I'm going to say SSIS config underscore server name, okay, and SSIS config underscore database name. Okay, so basically this is the server and the database where my configuration file is residing. Okay, oops, sorry, I have to create two variables. One is this one, and then the value for this one I'm gonna give my server name. Okay, sorry, that should be the value, not the, oops, I copy the value, and the value for the server is this. Okay, all right, so this is my first variable and should be here. There it is. Okay, and I'm going to create one more, which is database. Okay, and I'm going to give the database name as, where I'm doing my configuration file is in the database SQL Training 2017. Okay, so I give this name. Okay, so I have two variables. One is for my server and one is for my database where my configuration file is, sorry, configuration table is. All right, click OK, click OK. That's it. So you have to do the same thing when you are in the test. That would be your test server and your test database. When you are in the prod, it would be your prod server and prod database, right? And when in the dev, it would be your dev server and your dev database in the environment variable. And it needs to be created only one time, and then you can use that environment variable in all of your packages. Even if you have 10,000 packages, all can use the same environment variable, and you can have pointing it to same configuration table. You don't need to create configuration table for each project. So let's say you have one data mart, one project, another data mart, another project. No, you can have the same configuration table for all of them, for all of your projects, all of your databases, configuration file. Okay, so you can have this configuration table in your database. That is shared across all of them. Okay, so that's good. So you don't have to create so many environment variables. Yes. Yes, you go to connect and you get your server name. With the value would be. Yep, and then you create the database variable. Okay, so right now I'm putting in the SQL training. Think about, I have a one separate individual database for just the configuration table. I don't keep anything else in that database. That should be fine. So every time your database name would be that separate individual database for your configuration table. So all the configuration for all of the projects goes in that particular table. Okay, that could be good. That could be doable. So now why I'm saying that, because you want to use the same environment variable. You don't want to create tons of environment variables in your system, you know. So just everything points to one central location of your SSIS config table. So that would be useful when you have so many packages created, you know, one for each database or one for each data warehouse, something like that. So what I do is now I go back in here. Now I need to make this, as this connection string would be coming from where? For the SQL server. Where this will be coming from? When you move from dev to test, it would be coming from the environment variable, right? So I need to have a one more configuration in here, and I'm gonna say this time I'm gonna use the environment variable, and it says what's the environment variable that you're gonna use. So I say I'm gonna use the server name first. Okay, let's look for server. Oh yes, thank you. But SSIS config, but why it doesn't show up? Let's see. No, it's something wrong. So I gave SSIS config underscore server, right? Let's see. Maybe something I didn't do it correct then. Let's see. So I go to environment variables and I say my variable is two of them. Oh, why it's not showing the new ones? Maybe because it's not refreshed. So this is the old one. Okay, so either you can have everything in one of them, and this time I created separate. Either you can have just one config file and both of them goes in the same, or you can have separate. So it's right now it's pointing to the old one. Okay, I think it's not showing up because maybe I have to restart, you know, the package and everything. So if it's not showing up for you, it's the same thing. You basically have to close and restart the package or reopen the package. So it should show up right in here underneath the SSIS config. So let's do this. Cancel, close. I save the package and I reopen the package. All right, let's see. If it doesn't do, then we have to probably restart this management, the whole thing. But because those are not created, the variables that we created are the system variable, you know, Windows variable. That's why. So it might be it loads all the variables when this Visual Studio restarts, you know. So if I go to package configuration and I say add variables, and then yes, it didn't refresh. So probably this variables in the, so if you close and restart, it will show up. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to use the existing one that I had created for the last one. Is that fine? Okay, so but in the last one that I created is this one variable for server name and the database both. Okay, I don't have the separate. So like this time I created two of them separately, but previously I had, it's either way, it's fine, right? So it says the data source name, which is dart, and then the initial catalog is the database. So server and database, everything in one. All right, so we're going to point to that. So I'm going to add a configuration, an environment variable, and I say I'm going to use the config file, SSIS config. Okay, SSIS config. Now SSIS config would be setting, this would be the variables value will be setting to which one? It will be setting to this connection string, right? All right, so I click next and I say okay, this will be setting up the environment variable will be setting up this connection, right? Which is my SSIS configuration table. So I say, okay, whatever value I have it in my environment variable should be set for the connection string, right? Because that's what I have the connection string as a property. But if I would be doing the new variable that I've created, so I go for the server, and then I have to create one more environment variable configuration, and that would point to initial catalog for the database. Okay, so I have to create two configurations if I have two environment variables separate. If I just have one environment variable that points to both, which is connection string, then you point it in here. Makes sense? So because the connection string contains both, okay, and that's what the property I selected to put it in my environment variable. So I say connection string, click next, finish. All right, so this is basically the configuration that would point to your SSIS configuration table. So you have two configuration. One is for your SSIS configuration table itself, and then everything else for your packages would be in the table. Okay, is that clear? So now let's do the same configuration what we set up. So I'm going to close and restart it quickly. Okay, so in that way you don't have any confusion. So what I'm going to do is let's shut down, and I'm going to open the SQLServer data tool. So I can show you how to do it if you have the individual server name and database name. So I'm going to open the project. If you think it's a little confusing, tell me. You know, I can repeat, and I can go it a different way to, you know, make sure you get it what I'm trying to say, because I know these are the configurations makes it's very confusing. Okay. 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 So I think now we're gonna see. If I go to package configuration, let's remove this one, okay, the first one that I created, but that is pointing to this one right now. So the other way would be like how we did this time. So I add a configuration and I say it's an environment variable. So I'm making for this one, okay, with the variables that we created today. So let's see, the variables are loaded in here now. So see, I can see the variables. So what happens is when the Visual Studio restarts or opens, it loads all the variable. It doesn't keep refreshing, you know. So now I say, okay, I'm saying I want to use this variable. So when you're using this variable, does it has a value? Yes, it has a value of the server name where you have your config table. So do you want to replace, what you're going to do is when you're saying that I'm going to use this variable, it will take the value from the variable and put it in your package for the connection you're going to say. Okay, so basically what you're saying is copy the connection server name, what is in the variable, to my connection. Okay, so what's going to happen when you're in the test, this variable is in all, right, dev, test, and prod. So when you go in the test, this variable from the test will be copied to your package, right, the value from this config environment variable. When you go to prod, whatever the server name this connections this variable holds will be copied to your connection, right? So basically you are changing the server name using the environment variable when you are going into the different environments. Okay, so whatever the environment variable server environment variable holds the value for your server name will be copied into your package, and where in the package you have to define it. So I'm saying, okay, take the value for this from this variable. No worries. It's okay. All right. So, but you copying the value of the server name that is stored in the variable in your package. So you have to say where do you want to copy it, in which property. So I say, okay, I want to copy it in the property of my connection, which is this one, right? So this is the connection that is pointing, that is used for my SSIS configuration, right? So I say go into this property and set up what? Set up the server name. So what it's going to do, this server name will be overwritten from the environment variable. It doesn't matter what server name is in the package, it will be always taken from the environment variable. Okay, so I click next and I say this is my SSIS config for my SSIS config, right? And it's a server name. Okay, SSIS config for server. I click finish. I still have to do one more thing. I just set for the connection, I just set the server. I have to set the database for that, right? So you add one more connection, you click next, you say environment variable, and this time you're going to pick the SSIS config underscore database. So you're saying copy the value in this variable, in the environment variable, to my package. So you have to say where. So you say in here I want to copy it into the connection that points to my configuration table. So this is the connection that points to the configuration table, and in the properties I'm saying this is my database name, always overwrite this database name from the environment variable. Make sense? So you do that, click next, and this is basically SSIS config for your database. Sorry. Oops, I cannot hear you. You saying something? You saying something, Alex? Oh, okay, I cannot hear you at all. Let's do this. Do you want me to call my cell phone directly so we can get rid of the bridge, and then because we just two of us, I think you can hear me good. Okay, I don't have to type in. All right, I will let you call on my cell phone. Hey Alex. Hey. Okay. All right. You were asking something, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna point everything just close down. So in here, you will be pointing to the connection that you created for configuration table. So this is my connection for that is pointing to configuration table. So I go to the properties of that connection and I say I'm gonna set up the initial catalog, which is nothing but the database name. The database name is stored in this property variable. So I'm gonna say yeah, I know that's like the SSIS thing. It's the database name is called the initial catalog. Yep. So you're gonna say copy that variable value into here. So whenever you go from one environment to other, that always gonna read the value from the variable. So it will be overwritten, whatever in the package. It will be disregarded. So you click next. You give the name SSIS-config for the database and finish. So in here when you have created two variables, right, in the environment for each of them separately, you have to set it 2 times. But if you have just one variable like just SSIS-config, what you can do is you don't need to create separate and server name and the database name. What you can do is you can just take the connection string and which contains both the server and the database. So either way it's fine. Okay, either you do the whole thing using the connection string or you do is by server name and the initial catalog property. Okay, so what I'm saying is either you do by this, or what you can do is you can just create a one environment variable and you hold this thing inside that variable, which is data source. So that variable should contain this whole string what you have in here. Okay, so it should contain data source, which is your server name, then initial catalog, then provider, then integrated security. So you basically copy this thing in here and paste it in the environment variable. Okay, so then you set up this property from here basically when you configuring it within the package. So either way it should be fine. All right, so now that's it. So that's what you need to do when you have the SSIS configuration. Okay, so you can do one more thing. I mean, like, there are several ways to do it. It just depends on you how you want to do it. You don't have to do this from the environment variable. You can create a configuration file and have these 2 values in the configuration file instead of having tons. Okay, like in the ABC configuration file we created, we had tons of values. So in that you can have just these 2 values in the configuration file if you don't want to use the environment variable, you know. So that could be the other way of doing it. Or server, you have to do it in 2 ways. First you need to create a configuration table or use the existing one, and then for the configuration table you have to create either the environment variable or the XML configuration file. Okay, so I think that's it for today. In the next class what we're going to do is, this is for the older model, for before or until 2012, and we're going to see this is so much pain to set up all these kind of configuration for the packages. So once you're done with the project, we're going to apply these kind of configurations on your package level. In the next class we're going to implement the master child package, and we're going to talk more about how to implement this when you have so many packages. So we just seen the configuration. Now we're going to see how can you apply this when you have packages, okay, or different ETL framework. And then after we talk about the new that came in 2012, the project deployment model. So right now we are working on package deployment model. Okay, so I think we are getting closer to, you know, wrapping up the class. We just have like 2, 3 more, like very few classes left. They already